Welcome to the second kind of panel session of the day, the second series of panels. The topic for this panel is applying AI intelligently, use cases and risk management. So I've just come from a great session on RPA. We had lots of questions from the audience. Please, from any point, think about the questions that you want to put to the panel. We do want this to be as engaging as possible, as interactive as possible. So once I've invited all of our fantastic speakers to give some very short opening comments, I will be coming to you, the audience, to put your questions to the panel. In terms of our panel, we have Benoit Dehaye, who is Director of Responsible Data and Artificial Intelligence at the Office of the Chief Information Officer here in the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. Then we have Xiaoshong Chang, who I'm really pleased to say has come all the way from Singapore. Xiaoshong is the Deputy Chief Executive at the Government Technology Agency. Then we have Trent Gray-Donald, who is the Distinguished Engineer at IBM Data and AI. And also come from America, we've got Brian Epley, who's the Principal Deputy Chief Information Officer, Department of Energy at the United States. And then we have Ima Okene, who is Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Data Officer of Employment and Social Development, Canada. So the topic all about using AI, the potential huge benefits that might bring, but also how do we manage some of the risks that are associated with the use of AI as well. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Benoit to give us some opening remarks.
Thank you. What an honor to be opening this. So I wanted to talk to you about the federal government's approach in Canada to using AI responsibly. And we have a really long history of doing that. It started over 50 years ago. It started with our scientists using AI to make sense of the huge amounts of data that were becoming available through remote sensing technologies like satellites. But more recently, we've seen an expansion across all business lines, including in service delivery. So in 2018, along with another set of countries called the Digital Nations, we adopted guiding principles to guide our approach to using this technology within the Government of Canada. And the approach revolved around three main themes. The first one was transparency. We wanted Canadians to be aware of where and how we use this technology in significant fashion that impacts them. The second aspect was noting the importance of understanding the impacts of the automation and then taking steps to manage those impacts. And the last approach is around the education of our public service. So we want to ensure that employees that are using or deploying these systems have the skills to do that responsibly. So that's a set of guiding principles, but guiding principles are not enough. So a year later, in 2019, we adopted a set of mandatory rules. That's the Directive on Automated Decision Making. And we targeted what's potentially the most significant and impactful use case for automation, which is when we automate assessments about clients in the context of service delivery. And it seeks to address two main issues that can come with AI system. The first is fairness or the lack of fairness that can come from bias in the data or the systems themselves. The second aspect that we were seeking to address was the black box problem, where these systems can be very complex sometimes, and it's difficult to explain how certain decisions were made. And in the context of service delivery, that's problematic. If you deny service to someone, you need to be able to explain why you're doing that. So since the release of the directive in 2019, there's been 12 systems deployed that met the directive requirements, and they've been very successful. And it's worth noting that because of the automation, they can make better decisions that are faster, more efficient, more consistent, more interpretable, and fair as well. And more recently, the past year, we saw the use of generative AI being made available to the public in a sense. So again, we felt the need to offer guidance on this. So just a month ago, we released the guide on the use of generative AI. And the guide, first of all, establishes the approach that we would want the public service to adopt in using this technology. So that's the FASTER principles. You can look that up online. It forms an acronym. And in addition to the FASTER principles, we deep dive into 7 areas where for each area, we look at the potential issues, but then we offer best practices to get around those issues. And the goal here is to empower people to be successful in using it. So it covers things like quality, protection of information and privacy, legal issues, and so on. The key messages throughout all of these policies is that AI can be used, and there's benefits to doing that. You can get more efficient, more accurate, more consistent decisions. But before we use AI, it's important to understand the potential impacts and to manage the risks. And that's what these policy instruments that I've mentioned seek to do. So thank you.
Thanks, Benoit. Great way to start, because I think you've highlighted some of the key issues that I'm sure we'll get questions on. So as you said, potential to be really beneficial, to be faster, to be fairer, to kind of save time and money. But everything's moving so fast. And as you say, you brought out the principles, then you need the guidance, the more detailed guidance. And now you've just had to issue guidance on generative AI. So there's a real sense that in the public sector, we're having to move fast to keep up with all of the changes. And you mentioned there the importance of understanding the impact and potential biases on this. Thanks, Benoit. Xiaoxiong, over to you.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, I'm Sao Xiong, and I'm from the Government Technology Agency of Singapore. It's a long, long way from Singapore, so I hope you don't mind that the jet lag is still setting in. I'll try to keep awake as much as possible. So the Government Technology Agency of Singapore, or GovTech for short, is basically the implementation agency for digital transformation in Singapore. So I've heard a few talks this morning, and I think the focus has been really on policy, but unfortunately we are not the policy guys. We are the engineers for the Singapore government to implement digital transformation policies, and we built actually a lot of products and systems for the Singapore government to both make a digital government, but also to implement our Smart Nation initiatives so that we can better serve our citizens and the public. So that, in short, is what GovTech is. And we actually use a lot of AI and a lot of data as well, as you can imagine, building our systems. And this is really a sort of a whole new world, I think, for everyone. And what we're trying to do here is really to build slowly and to learn and to take some of our learnings back and try to reapply that. So in a much more iterative and agile manner, in order to sort of like not do too many things at the same time, but at the same time, each thing that we do will benefit the public that we serve. Yeah. So a quick and short introduction.
Thank you. And I think what you said really important there about you are having to move fast. So you're having to use AI, but also at the same time, you need to make sure you're agile enough to be able to learn from how that's impacting and then maybe go back and revise and tweak some of the systems. Yeah.
That's right.
Thanks, Xiaoxiong. Trent.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm obviously from IBM here, and one of the things that we see as incredibly important is that AI doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Without good data, there is no AI, or at least it's basically the moral equivalent of garbage in, garbage out. And we see that in all domains, and obviously there's a lot of promise around what we see in AI, both in what I'll call traditional machine learning, which is probably what most people use most of the time. And then there's also the new world of generative AI, which is, I actually just a quick show of hands, who here has played with any of the generative AI solutions like ChatGPT and so on, right? Yeah, exactly. And then I'm not going to ask who was allowed to at work, because that's actually the fundamental point.
Trent, we actually did a survey of Canadian civil servants, and I think about 20% of policy advisors have been using ChatGPT to write submissions to ministers. Now, whether you're allowed to or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But you're doing it, and apparently ministers like it. So.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're seeing right now, is that pretty well every customer I speak to has laid down a ban. No Gen AI in the cloud, because literally you're giving your data to that vendor and they are now training their models and improving the models based on what you did, whether you wanted to or not. So a lot of what we do and spend our time with is focusing on how do we do this in a safe way that gives people control over their data and the understanding of it, so it doesn't go places where it shouldn't. Anyway, the possibilities here are amazing. It's figuring out how to do so in a safe, governed, and frankly, cost-effective way. because the number of times that we've seen customers they use one of the big vendors, run up a big bill, say, show the POC to their superiors. The superiors love it. Green light. They look at the budget, red light. Anyway, excited to talk today.
Thanks, Trent. That issue around understanding, you might be excited about the opportunities, excited about what it can achieve, but how do you do it in a safe way? And I think across the public sector, there's a sense everybody's thinking about this, but not yet maybe knowing how to organize our thinking about it. Yep. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you. Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Siobhan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Epley. I'm the Principal Deputy CIO for the United States Department of Energy. And there's a common theme that my peers here on the panel that I'll echo, but I want to give you a unique and distinct perspective from the Department of Energy. Our mission is to ensure America's security and prosperity across energy, environmental, and nuclear security challenges and balance of how we deploy or develop scientific and technology solutions in that space. So the two themes that I want to echo or really highlight today with you in the open discussion is that AI is core to the priorities within DOE in those areas of energy, environmental, and nuclear security. And then secondly, it's really about collaboration, what we do across the public sector and how it impacts you, the end user, and the public at large. The Department of Energy has made material advances. We've been doing this for many years. As Benoit mentioned, not quite 50 to record for me, but what does that mean? We've made investments in high performance computing. We're advancing the software development. We're looking at how we're going to advance not only mission focus within DOE, but it's really a balance that, and I want to echo, hopefully you all take this home. Nadine referenced in the previous panel here in this room, Hall 1, the balance between profound power and the responsibility, and that's a play on the Spider-Man theme. That's key to AI. It has profound opportunity and power, but with that comes a balance of responsibility, and that's why collaboration is key. So aside from the high performance computing in terms of those investments, the advancements and developments are a broad spectrum. Within the DOE, I'm talking about weather modeling. We made two advancements in two labs, our Pacific Northwest and Berkeley labs. And we looked at how we could manage incident and response on the cybersecurity. In the last few years, we've leveraged our high performance computing to evaluate the COVID-19 genome. And that's a shift from the human side. So I'm moving from a cyber perspective to the energy and the environment and the broadest aspect that AI comes into play. The risk that we have with that is, I think I heard my colleagues mention it, how fast these things are moving. And we don't want to contain that, but what we've done in my office is we created an AI Tiger team that was across the Department of Energy with those different facets of focus to look at and define how the use cases that are unique and specific to their mission are going to balance out with that risk, that the potential risk, I should say, and try to keep up with that. So the outcome, the result of that Tiger team so far has been guidelines. The first thing that happened when the latest ChatGPT release, LLM, came out, we need policy. I don't think policy was the answer. What we needed to do was balance the use cases with that potential risk so that we could, as my colleague here, Trent said, govern guardrails to protect us, but enable some of that acceleration. So I'm excited to be here and talk through some of the topics and get the audience engagement, but I would also encourage you to reach out to myself and Duncan, the CIO for the Department of Energy. We'd be happy to partner, collaborate, and engage with you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Siobhan.
Thanks, Brian. And great, as Brian said, you'll be around, won't you, in the kind of refreshment area and network and everything, so people can ask you other questions afterwards. Same for all of the panel. But again, you raised other issues there. AI, not just like a nice thing to have, but actually it's going to be core to delivering on your mission. So as kind of security risks get larger, as resources get squeezed, we're only going to be able to achieve all of those things if we're embracing all of these new technologies. But with that profound, as you say, power comes these big responsibilities, and we have to be addressing all of those. And I love the examples that you gave and the idea that you've kind of created a tiger team that can actually focus just on this and maybe carve out some time to be meeting some of that speed with which it's kind of coming towards us. Thanks, Brian. And then last but by no means least, Emma, we'll hear from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you, TBS and the organizers, for really bringing us to sit down and discuss this extremely important topic. This topic is extremely important for multiple reasons. One, just want to take people back. A few days ago in Canada, we celebrated, or we sat down and reflected on reconciliation. For those of you who are not from Canada, we mark this day as a date of truth and reconciliation. Canada is a very diverse country. Our population just marked 40 million people. We welcome immigrants from across the world. And when we talk about AI, it is extremely important that AI reflects Canadian values. So when I say Canadian values, I talk about things like reconciliation, I talk about inclusion, I talk about diversity. I talk about the importance of ensuring that whatever we're doing in terms of embedding those technologies into our everyday operation reflects policy intent. I come from a department that really focuses on how we can enhance services to Canadians, so people across this country, regardless of where they sit, whether in the rural areas, the urban areas, reserves, wherever they are in the country, we need to be able to ensure that they're getting to that optimal outcome. And as I look at things and reflect on artificial intelligence, like you said, there's extreme power in terms of leveraging it to reach some of the people who are most at risk, who are not getting some of the services, people who are underserved across this country. But there's also enormous risk. And when I talk about risk, the risk of leaving people out, leaving women out, leaving youth out, leaving people who are at the margins of society. And one of the things that we take very seriously is really making sure that we also meet some of the Privacy Act. We have very strong privacy laws in Canada. We need to make sure that we're meeting some of the legislative requirements. Benoit spoke very well about the TBS directive. Make sure that we're following some of those, the guidelines, the directives around automated decision-making. Make sure that we're following the intent of the law. We have very strict law about how we do our programs, how we move operations around the system. So to me, it's an art and it's also a science. It's about technology, but it's also about people, and people are at the core of everything we do. And we should not forget that. We should not forget that ensuring that we do not leave people out as we implement these technologies. You said the word fast a lot of times. I didn't count it, but you kept saying fast. So as we move fast, we also have to ensure that at the core of that is our humanity. And I think that is how we are working to implement artificial intelligence within my department in a way that's very intentional, in a way that's reflective of the population we serve, in a way that really ensures that we're embedding some of those practicalities in terms of looking at the research. Research, you talked about COVID. Research clearly showed that there were populations that were disproportionately impacted by COVID. We looked at people in the service industry. StatsCan, I don't know if StatsCan Canada is represented in the room. StatsCan has done excellent research around the implications of impact of COVID on our populations. And there were significant differences. We were not all impacted the same way. So as we look at delivering services, as we look at implementing things around AI, natural language processing, we need to remember we're a Francophone, an Anglophone country, we're a bilingual country. So when you look at things like natural language processing, we found that there's some biases in terms of how it treats language. It treats Anglophone text different from Francophone text. So how do we ensure that we're treating people fairly in terms of using some of those applications, in terms of making decisions, in terms of processing applications? So these are some of the things that keep me up at night, and really looking forward to digging into it and some of what we're doing in my department. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. I mean, it's very easy, and I think I've opened so many webinars and sessions on AI saying, yes, there's all the potential there. We need to be aware of the risks, but actually we have to actually pause and go, what are those risks? And really dig down into what are those risks. And actually you summarized it so nicely there, making sure that we don't leave people out as we embrace and embed some of these new technologies. And I think already we know that some of our just digital services are leaving people out. So if we then make it even worse as we embed new technologies, we're going to create a really serious issue for ourselves. Thank you so much to the panel for setting the scene with those great questions. I'm going to throw it straight open to the floor because I think there's so much food for thought that has come out there. I'm probably going to take 2 questions, maybe even 3 questions at a time. So do you want to put your hand up if you've got a question? Yes, so there's a lady here and then a gentleman there. Do we have microphones in the room? Can I see? Or we have microphones near you. Sorry, if you could walk to that microphone. Yeah, sorry. If you both come here, we'll take both those questions. We'll take 3. Come on, why not? Let's take 3. And then you can choose whether you answer 1, 2, or 3 of the questions. Then we'll take another round of questions. Over to you.
Hello. Zareen Langari from the head of the Digital Accelerator at the Natural Resources Canada. My question is mainly for Benoit, but anybody else also can answer. The guidelines from TBS for the use of generative AI, my question is, seems that these are more recommendations rather than the actual guidelines and principles, and for the more either the development or using it for both cases. And it seems that it's left to each department to develop their own set of guidelines, which I'm just wondering if, like, is this the case, first of all, or another detailed guidelines going to come out? Or if you're developing it, like, are we following something that creates something centralized among all the departments, or everybody follows their own guidelines?
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to broaden your question out a little bit so that everybody can answer it, which is how flexible are you on the guidelines, or do you think we're going to increasingly specify exactly how people use this technology? So you can all answer that one. Next question.
You don't want the panel to answer the first question?
No, I'm going to take 3 and then we're going to give them a
perfect.
choice.
So Alain Gauthier, I'm part of ESDC. Hi, Ima. Same department, the IT branch, and I'm leading the team that's doing our research on generative AI. My question is not to you, Ima, but to your colleague at Treasury Board. In a former role not that long ago, I was responsible for vendor management. And some of the stuff that is being not talked about in the guidelines, for example, the use of your work email to create free accounts, does raise concerns for me. I've seen my department and other departments be, for lack of a better word, nailed by corporations for using personal accounts to do enterprise level work and the financial considerations that come out of that. I have done a lot of reading of the T's and C's of your open AIs and competitors, and it concerns me that as they develop corporate products, the fact that we may have, say, in our department, 500 HRSDC email addresses using the free accounts may expose us to a liability. Is Treasury Board looking to do anything about that in the next iteration of its guidelines?
Benoit, you've had 2 questions directed. Can I, because that one's very specific, can I ask you quickly to answer that one, and then we'll take your question, okay?
Certainly. So on the use of personal emails, if it's for official business, the direction should be to use an official email, not to use a personal account. Now, some sites require a login through, let's say, a Google or Facebook account, and that's the only mechanism. So my recommendation would be to create an account specific to your organization in that way. But to your point, and I'll speak more to that, to the future plans of the guideline, but that is something we've heard from many stakeholders, the question as to which email do we use. And we do plan on adding a note to that effect in the next version. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, the next question.
Hi, my name is Saif from Statistics Canada. I really like when, Brian, you mentioned about with great power comes great responsibility. So as public servants, what do you think would be the skill set that we would need to effectively oversee and manage AI products when they're deployed?
Great question. Thank you. So what skills will we need in the civil service to meet that great power, great responsibility kind of new world that we're in? Thanks very much, Saif. Okay, so the two questions that are left is, how directive do you think central guidance should be to people who are starting to think about using AI? And then secondly, what skills are people going to need to be able to kind of oversee the implementation of AI? I'm going to mix up the order a little bit. Imma, I'll start with you and we'll go that way.
I'll start with the last one. I think in terms of the skill set you need a multidisciplinary team, because one of the challenges that we have is we're very stuck in our own silo. So in terms of ensuring, and I'll speak from my context, because my context is about delivering services across this country, you need to understand the populations you serve. And to understand the populations you serve and to also understand the context in which you're operating, you cannot do it from a purely technical perspective. You need to bring the contextualization piece into your work. So one of the strong intentional focuses that I've looked at recently is ensuring that the team is not just diverse in terms of the thought, but also diverse in terms of the context that they're bringing into the conversation. So working closely, with the subject matter experts, making sure that you're also bringing pieces of the law into whatever you're doing. So don't just go and build an app or build something. Sit down with your legal, your privacy colleagues, make sure you're bringing them along on that journey. And then in terms of the second question, because the question was about how directive should TBS be. In my view, so this is from my personal perspective, I think it's important that TBS doesn't become too prescriptive. Because if you look across the different departments and the different contexts we work in, I've worked in 5 different departments, and the contexts were all very different in terms of the organizational structures and the cultures. I think what is more important is that you're connecting across the organization with your chief privacy officer, your chief data officer, you're connecting with your CIO, and you're not doing things in silo. Because one of the issues I've seen happen is when people build in silo, and then to your point, I think Trent, you made that point where they later try to scale up without taking some of the considerations across the organization into factor. And then what happens is they find they're stuck. So to me, the bigger thing is making sure you're building those partnerships and collaborating to make sure that you're actually implementing whatever you're implementing in the context of the organization you worked at, as opposed to TBS putting out prescriptive guidelines.
Thanks, Imma. Yeah. Brian, your thoughts on skills and also the level of guidance required?
Sure, thank you, Siobhan. Great questions. I'd like to start with question 1. I think it helps frame the perspective in my response. How flexible are we? I think that's key to what I mentioned earlier, the balance between profound power and even probably greater responsibility, which is why I steered away from policy and more of the guardrails. That's an example of how we're trying to maintain some flexibility. But what is key in this journey is that we have, I hate to use the term checks and balances, but iterative processes to understand, are we still true to the spirit of whether it be the mission or the customer delivery from a public sector service? And then those checks and balances bring us back to the use case and allow us to course correct as we learn. Because we have to remember that these large language models are driving not only language, but how we learn and how we deliver. Another aspect of that balance. I think that we also have another key focus area is on data integrity. I think that the U.S. Federal CIO, Claire Monterano, said in her keynote that we have branding is key to what we're doing in the U.S. in terms of how we present that data, but we're trying to play catch up. We have data that we're still responding to that is decades old. So I think the focus has got to be on data integrity and how we maintain that in its current application. That's another aspect of the checks and balances. Is this data still current? Do we need to relearn? And how is that going to affect where we go forward? Again, course corrections. And then aside from the protecting the data integrity, there's a balance between the intellectual property. So as we do science, research, and apply a lot of these things to our mission applications, whether it's weapons or weather modeling, some of that stuff is not ready for prime time consumption. And there's a balance between that intellectual property protection and guarding from hallucinations. Again, bad data infiltrating something that's going to negatively influence a training model and an outcome that could affect public sector, just the masses at large. And then if I can, I'll segue to the third question, which was really about the skills. And I think that the skills, as Emma mentioned, it's not just about the technology, although we mentioned how rapidly fast technology is evolving. We need to stay current with the technology, but I also think it's got to be in concert. This is why I said in my opening remark, collaboration is critical to our success and the balance of this power and the responsibility that comes with that. And what I mean by that balance is, how do we stay current as the technology rapidly advances and still stay true to whether it be the mission or the service delivery that we're committed to? And back to the flexibility, it's not just about those guidelines, but how do those guardrails enable us to continue to advance in a safe, protected manner?
Thanks, Brian. I'm conscious we're going to have more questions, so Trent and Xiaosheng, I'll ask you very quickly on these, and then Benoit, I'll do new questions for you. Okay.
Yeah. So very quickly, first, completely agree with what the other panelists have said. For me, it's all about, from a skills perspective and from a framework perspective, it's about trust and transparency. Are you able to so do you have people with the right skills that can ensure trust and transparency in all these different aspects? So whether that's understanding explainability, bias detection, debiasing, any number of different techniques, but then that's the technical side. Then there's the whole policy side, and every situation is different. You can't expect a thou shalt at a very specific level. So for instance, generating thank you notes is very different than generating code, is very different than generating output to a public-facing chat service, right? Each of them has very different reputational concerns or trustworthiness concerns, or frankly, intellectual property. So let's look at code generation, which I spend a lot of time working on. A lot of the models that are out there today are trained on data that has licenses that you would not want your product to have in them, right? So you may suddenly have copyleft code in your stuff and you have to open source all your code. That's very different than other situations. So the impact and decisions at each point is incredibly important, and that every use case is different in that case.
Thanks, Trent. Xiaosheng.
Yeah, so I totally agree with the rest of the panelists as well. And it's a very similar approach that we use in Singapore as well. But I just wanted to add that actually the technology today is still so new and it's changing so quickly. There are a lot of unknowns. So in both cases of skills as well as the policies, it's very often that if you decide on something or you think that something is necessary as a skill, it changes totally tomorrow. And that is the world we're facing today. So we probably need to be a lot more agile and a lot more iterative in dealing with things. And at the same time, I think a lot of people look towards the engineers, the software engineers, to solving a lot of these problems. But fundamentally, I think even the software engineers do not realize the scale of the change that has happened, the fundamental change in paradigm in software development. That is on the base technology, but if I look at it on a higher level, actually a lot of the applications that we use are still very similar, because we are still going through a phase of digital transformation for a lot of our systems. The base skills and capabilities are still needed. The skills that are using today does not change fundamentally, but the understanding of the effects of the systems that are produced, those are the things that change. So I would say, from my point of view, we do need to be a lot more agile in doing things, but I think we don't need to throw away all the skills and capabilities where we have in the past, but continue using them to deliver the systems that we want.
Great. I think that's a core point. Don't lose the good stuff, but we need to be more agile. I think that word keeps coming up, doesn't it? Benoit, I'll come to you for the next question. So we've got a lady there waiting at the microphone, And then there's a hand up there. Yes, gentlemen, do you want to come to this microphone and I'll take your, yep.
I work in military procurement, and my question is actually for the panelists from Singapore and the United States. I'm interested in how your administrations have been able to leverage the efficiencies that can be found in artificial intelligence while balancing the importance of protecting national security interests. So for instance, how do you retain the security classification of the system to ensure it matches the data that gets put on it? In a Canadian context, we don't have a Government of Canada's own AI system. So when we talk about using AI, we're actually talking about using third-party commercial AI. And so this is a challenge. So I'd love to hear, and from a technical perspective, not policy perspective, how you guys have overcome that challenge.
Great. So Xiaoshong and Brian, I'll come to you to answer that question in a moment. And then we've got a question here.
So I also have a question that is more technical. So I see there's a lot of enthusiasm towards the excitement of AI, but a lot of teams are working with unstructured data from various sources, and it's poor quality data. So what are some actionable steps that can be taken to move towards the use of AI-driven solutions and data-driven solutions?
Great, thank you. And I think, Trent, it was you that said the data was the key thing. So I might start with you on that question in a moment. But Benoit, your thoughts on data, maybe, and then we'll come on to the security one after.
Certainly an enabler. AI is data-driven technology, and we've seen departments that are moving very quickly now with adopting GPT-like technology on their own data. And the reason they're able to do that already is because they spent the past few years governing their data appropriately, organizing their data. So a lot of it comes down to basic IM best practices. Is your data findable? The FAIR principles. So that's really key in this. And of course, we can take the approach of looking forward, where as we generate new data, we integrate that in AI system, but that's such a missed opportunity of your historical data. And the power of these systems will really come when we make that data available to the system so that they have your context, your organizational knowledge available to them to generate responses. And the key there is really to manage the data appropriately so that there's the right security controls, the right metadata around it, so that you can deploy it in the system.
Thanks, Benoit. Trent, I'll come to you on data.
Sure, absolutely. I completely agree with what Benoit just said. It all starts with understanding your data, governing your data, basically discovering the data, and then going through stuff that people think, oh, geez, we're still doing this in 2023. But the fundamentals of data management still hold true and have been for many, many years. What we see a lot of customers doing is they try to skip right past the hard work, basically the blood, sweat, and tears of organizing your data and say, okay, I'm doing AI now. And it never works out. So it's really lining up those, I mean, it sounds dull, but it's cataloging your data. It's classifying your data. It's building up the ontologies. It's building the business glossaries. All that stuff feeds directly into more successful AI outcomes. So that's the short version.
Thanks, Trent. I think that really resonated with people, the data issue. Emma, quickly on data, and then we'll do the security question.
Yes, no, I'll add to that. So what I would say, I'll give you a practical example from an ESDC perspective. In terms of our data strategy, we put a lot of focus on the data foundation. So remember the iceberg. Nobody wants to look under the iceberg, but that's what we focused on. So a lot of that work really entailed working with our program departments and then just integrating and curating that data to make sure it made sense. The other piece of this that I wanted to come at this was the unstructured data. There are also ways of leveraging some of the tools we have to really build intelligence and insights out of that unstructured data. So we're also working in terms of looking at it two ways. How can we curate that data to make it, sound quality, to make it usable, to leverage some of the new tools that are coming up? Today is AI, tomorrow it might be something else. And then we're also looking at unstructured and the poor quality data in terms of what patterns are we seeing in that data. And can we go back and re-engineer some of the processes we have in place today to make sure that we're not replicating that as we build new systems? So that's how we're coming at it.
Thank you. And then Brian and then Xiaoshong, this question of how do you balance bringing in maybe third-party AI providers in a kind of national security or military policy area? Brian first.
Sure, thank you, Siobhan. Great question. I want to go back to the other question. I think that it really relies incredibly on the data management. And the reason that's so important is that data management is what we use to learn and build intelligence to make informed decisions. So back to the second question, procurement, specifically military applications. As I said, DOE's mission is really focused on ensuring America's security and prosperity. But the three core areas are science, energy, and national security. So that third part is, I think, core to your question. And the data integrity and the learning model by which we use that to generate that intelligence leads to supply chain risk management, software, bill of materials. These are a couple of things that highlight in regulations, back to policy. And the challenge that we face today, which is why we have to look to third-party AI and other tools, is because while the technology is accelerating, we're not able to keep up with the data that's necessary to learn and build and accelerate some of those deployment models. So in many ways, things are moving almost too fast, or we're not able to keep up with what's happening. And the reliance on third parties' applications and their development is key. It comes back to the balance in terms of learning who is mature and how do we balance the risk that comes with that. And that's really the unknown.
Thanks, Brian. Xiaoshong.
Yeah, I think in terms of data security, there is definitely a concern when you start using third-party AI providers. I think that's kind of universal because you are sending data to a provider you don't really know and you are not quite sure what they're going to do with it. They can promise you a lot of things. They can put it in their terms and conditions. They would touch it. They would use it to train their models and so on. But you don't really know what they're going to do. So at the end of the day, it's about the risk level that you are accepting. If you create a system that uses a provider, then you must be able to accept the risk that eventually some of the data that you put there might get lost or might get intercepted by somebody else. But I would say from a technical perspective, in recent developments, there has been a number of open source models that you can actually deploy both in-house, on-prem in terms of your own servers, but even down to local machines like your laptops and so on. So I think the development is definitely very promising. I think there are a lot of things that are going to happen that will change the way that we think about how we look at data.
Thanks, Xiaoshong. I've been given the 5-minute warning, so I'm afraid we can only take 2 questions. So I'm going to take the gentleman here and then the gentleman at the back, sorry. And then very quickly, could you answer just one of the 2 questions? So, yeah.
This is the fun question. Cesare from ESDC. AGI, what's your take on it? Artificial general intelligence apparently has been achieved as a joke, of course, but if it happens, what do we do? Do you think about that? Thanks.
Okay, artificial and general intelligence, that's a new one to me. So any thoughts on that? And then at the back.
Yeah, just a quick question. Most of you have already touched on the data security part, but more specifically, if you have any comments for data sovereignty, including DAI, from that perspective.
Data sovereignty, really good issue, because I think that prevents quite a lot of data sharing, I think, as well, because people aren't sure on the kind of sovereignty issues. Okay, Benoit, we'll start there. So either data sovereignty or artificial and general intelligence.
Yeah.
Not that I know what that is at all. So
I'll take the easy one, which is AGI, which is not the easy one. My concern when we bring that up is that we're forgetting about the real impacts of AI today. And certainly AGI, we need to think about it. Like, let's not ignore it, but we're not there yet. And it's not on the short horizon. It's a much longer horizon. In the meantime, there are AI systems deployed that impact, all facets of our everyday life, whether it's online or through interactions with governments and all this. And I don't want the debate to lose track of these very real impacts that exist today. And so we need to be thinking about those impacts, to manage those impacts, think about the risks of your data leaking out through providers and all of this, all the things we've discussed. So let's not forget about that in this debate. So that's, yeah.
Thanks. Xiaosheng.
Yeah, I want to talk about AGI. Talk about the data sovereignty. That is definitely of a concern for Singapore. Singapore is a very small island state, and we don't have a lot of space to put data centers, so not a lot of people actually put data centers here. So data sovereignty is an issue when we start talking about systems and how we're going to deploy systems that require the data to be resident in country. So it's not a solved problem. What I'm trying to say here is we're still grappling with it. We're still trying to look at what's the best way of tackling it. It is going to be an issue. But as I said, I think the newer technologies are coming up, and hopefully some of these things will be able to solve some of these data sovereignty problems.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Trent.
Around data sovereignty, huge issue. What we're seeing is a couple of interesting patterns emerging. One of them is around what we call data fabrics, and the other is around data meshes. And both of them have this concept of what we call data products, which intermediate between data producers and data consumers. And what you would do is you literally have these pseudo contracts and specify what you're allowed to do with the data, where it's allowed to reside, and so on. So that's, to your point, it's starting to address some of the core issues around sovereignty, because it's possible to move data. It's just, okay, are there techniques to stop you, or are there sort of, quote, legal things that stop you there? But it's hugely important.
Thanks, Trent. Brian and Emma, we're officially over time, so very quickly, if possible.
I think it's a balance. I would start with data sovereignty because that's the root or data source. I just saw in the news this morning about deep fakes. There was a couple of articles that I saw and read, and that's an example. If we don't have the trust and transparency of that sovereign data, regardless of where it exists, locally or shared in a trusted fashion across partner countries, we don't know what we're getting, and we're misinformed. And that's just a simple example. Great question.
Thanks, Brian. Final words to you, Emma.
Two questions are great, and I'll answer the AGI one by saying, regardless of whatever we do, let's keep humanity at the center of what we do. And I'm less concerned about AGI than I am with us being more intentional about humanity today.
Great answer. I think that's a perfect final sentence to summarize this panel. I'm sure you will join me in saying a huge thank you to our fantastic panel. Thank you so much. Just to let you know, if you are staying in here, the next session starting at 12 is Transforming Together, Managing and Commissioning Digital Projects. And then in 205 downstairs, it's Safe Investment, Cybersecurity as a Catalyst of Business Transformation. And in 206, it's A Helping Hand, Access for All. And there are other AI sessions running today if you didn't manage to get your question answered today. So please do join those. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much. Great session.